My sister said it while standing in my own living room, one hand resting on her stomach like a prop she had practiced carrying. Amber Whitaker looked straight at me and said, "Maybe if you could give Kevin a child, he wouldn't have needed me." My husband, Kevin Ellison, stood beside her like the betrayal had already been planned, rehearsed, and finalized without me. Then Kevin told me Amber was pregnant with his baby and that he wanted a divorce. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I did not beg. I only looked at both of them for a long, steady moment and said, "I hope you are both very sure about that. My name is Cara Whitaker. I am 30 years old, from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and I work as an elementary school counselor. For 6 years I was married to Kevin. For 4 of those years, everyone around me quietly blamed me because we had no children. His mother prayed over me like I was something broken. My sister pitied me in public and mocked me in private. What none of them knew was that I had been carrying the truth alone for years. Not because I was weak, because I loved a man who could not survive it. 3 years into our marriage, Kevin and I went to Hargrove Family Clinic together for fertility testing. We drove there early on a Tuesday morning, holding hands in the waiting room the way people do when they are afraid but trying not to show it. My results came back completely normal. Kevin did not. The doctor spoke gently about low sperm count and reduced natural fertility odds, about options we could explore if we wanted to keep trying. Kevin sat in the plastic chair beside me, pale and completely silent. He stared at the floor the whole drive home. That night he asked me not to tell anyone. He said it quietly, like a man asking a favor, but his eyes said something closer to a plea. I looked at him and said yes. I promised him I would not tell a single person. That promise became the thing he later used against me. Kept it for 3 full years. Through every pointed comment from his mother. Through every time my sister asked, with that particular smile, whether we had any news. Through every family dinner where children were discussed. I said nothing and smiled and carried the secret like a stone pressed into the center of my chest. Amber had always wanted whatever looked better from the outside. When I got a compliment, she needed a bigger one. When I wore something people noticed, she bought something louder the following week. She was my younger sister by 3 years, and she had spent most of those years studying me for things to take. So when she stood in my living room with her hand on her stomach and Kevin beside her, I understood immediately that this had not been about love. This had been about winning. She performed every second of it. She touched her stomach slowly and deliberately. She lowered her voice when she called the baby the miracle this family deserved. She tilted her head when she looked at me, the way someone does when they are checking whether the wound landed correctly. Kevin did not look guilty standing beside her. He looked relieved. That hurt worse than the affair itself. Relief meant he had been waiting for this. Relief meant he had decided before tonight that I was the problem and Amber was the solution. I had given 6 years of my life to a man who had just handed me a summary of how little those years had meant to him while he stood in the home we shared. Kevin's mother, Helen Ellison, arrived 30 minutes after they told me. She came through my front door without knocking, the way she always did, like her access to my house was unconditional. For 4 years, Helen had looked at me the way people look at a locked door standing between them and something they want. She had sent me articles about fertility clinics. She had suggested diets. She had once held my hand at a family lunch and told me, with her most generous expression, that some women were simply not built for motherhood and that God had other plans for them. When she walked in and saw Amber, she smiled. A full smile, wide and warm, the kind she had never once given me. She crossed the room and placed both hands on Amber's face like she was greeting a daughter she had finally been permitted to claim. Then she turned to me and said, "Some women are wives. Some women are lessons." I looked at Kevin and waited for one sentence. Anything to remind her I was still in the room. He looked at the floor. That was the moment my marriage ended inside me, quietly. Before any document was ever signed or any court was ever asked to decide anything about either of us. I drove to my father's house with my wedding ring still on my finger because I did not know what to do with my hands without it. My father, Thomas Whitaker, is 58 years old, a retired school principal, and the steadiest man I have ever known until someone hurts his child. I sat at his kitchen table and told him everything from the beginning. The clinic results, the promise I kept, the 3 years of silence while people called me broken. He listened without interrupting, which is the thing about my father. He gives you the whole space to say everything before he responds. When I finally said, "Dad, Kevin can barely have children naturally," his face changed. Not with anger first, with understanding. Like a man fitting a key into a lock that had been confusing him for years. Then he said quietly, "Kara, kindness is not the same thing as silence forever." He made me tea and sat with me for another hour. When I left, he walked me to my car and held my hand at the door. He said, "We take the next step in the morning." I drove home feeling slightly less alone than I had felt since the night Kevin stood beside my sister in my own living room. The next morning, Dad drove me to meet Pauline Hale, a family attorney who had practiced in our county for 22 years and who had, according to my father, heard every variety of lie that family situations can produce. Her office was small and organized, the kind of space that signals immediately that the person inside does not waste time. I told Pauline I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth on record, and the marriage dissolved fairly. She nodded and said that peace requires accuracy, especially when someone is building a divorce filing on facts that are wrong. She asked if I had clinic records from our fertility testing. I told her I had my own results and the joint appointment summary from our couple's consultation. Her pen stopped moving. She looked at me over her glasses for a full second. "Once he puts fertility into the filing, he opens the door himself," she said. "We don't need to knock." She asked me to bring everything I had saved. I told her I had more than people might expect. She smiled and wrote something at the top of a fresh page. I left her office feeling the ground was solid again for the first time since everything broke open in my living room. Kevin's divorce petition arrived 2 days later by certified mail. I signed for it at my door in the early morning while still in my robe. I brought it inside, made coffee, and sat down before I opened it. His attorney's filing stated the marriage had broken down due to emotional strain caused by infertility and the petitioner's unwillingness to pursue consistent family-building options. I read that sentence 3 times. The third time my hands were shaking. Not from sadness. From the specific anger that comes when someone takes the secret you protected them with and turns it into the legal reason you deserve to lose everything. Kevin had taken the promise I kept to protect his dignity and placed it into a court document as my failure. He had signed his name to a story in which I was the broken one, and he was the patient man who had endured enough. What Kevin did not understand was that the moment he made fertility the argument, he had opened the one door I had been keeping closed for him. Pauline had said it exactly. He opened it himself. All we needed to do now was walk through it with everything I had saved, organized and ready. Amber started calling relatives before I had even responded to the filing. She told our Aunt Patrice I had been cold to Kevin for years. She told our cousins I resented her pregnancy because it exposed me as the problem all along. She told Helen that Kevin had suffered patiently in a marriage that gave him nothing. I did not call anyone to correct any of it. I did not post anything. I did not ask a single person to defend me. I watched the version of events she was building and I let her build it. Not because I had given up. Because every confident lie Amber told out loud became a documented claim I could later disprove with something more lasting than my word against hers. Pauline had said it during our second meeting. When someone is lying with confidence, the worst thing you can do is argue with them before you are fully prepared. You let them build the structure. You wait until it is tall and visible. Then you show the room what it was built on and let people look for themselves. I was not quiet because I was afraid. I was quiet because I was still preparing everything that needed to be ready before a single word came from me. Amber announced she was 12 weeks pregnant at a family dinner I chose not to attend. My cousin Brianna sent me the message that evening because she pays attention to details other people let pass. I read it at my kitchen table. 12 weeks. I stayed with that number for a moment. Then I opened the calendar on my phone. 12 weeks placed the conception during the exact week Kevin and I had been in Denver for my school counseling conference. I had flown out on a Sunday morning and returned the following Friday. Kevin had driven me to the airport himself and picked me up when I landed. I had the hotel confirmation in my email. I had the conference program with my name on the registered attendee list. I had photographs from the Thursday evening awards banquet where I stood beside my regional director, smiling 5 states away from Lancaster County. Amber had announced a timeline loud enough for anyone with a calendar to check against documented facts. She had made her first clear mistake. I forwarded the date to Pauline that evening with a note that said simply, "She just gave us the first crack." Pauline replied within the hour, "Save everything. All of it." Kevin showed up at my apartment 9 days after the petition arrived. He rang the bell at 7 in the evening and stood in the doorway looking tired in a way that was different from simple exhaustion. It was the tiredness of someone who had begun to realize the ground under their plan was less solid than it had seemed. For one moment, I almost believed guilt had found him. Then he asked me, before asking how I was, whether I still had the clinic documents from Hargrove Family Clinic. Not hello. Now I am sorry. Just the documents. Just the one thing that could quietly dissolve the story he and Amber were building together. I looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then I said, "You should ask your future wife why she is counting weeks so loudly." His expression shifted from tired to something that looked more like fear. I told him to have a good evening. Then I closed the door. I stood on my side of it and listened to him stay there for a few seconds before his footsteps moved back toward the elevator. I did not open the door again. I went to the kitchen and made tea. My hands were completely steady. Pauline and I spent 2 careful meetings organizing exactly what I was legally permitted to use. We took nothing that was not mine. We built our response entirely from documents that already belonged to me. My own fertility results from Hargrove, the joint appointment summary from our couple's consultation, the written clinic recommendations, and a formal letter Pauline requested from Hargrove's records office confirming that male factor fertility concerns had been part of the documented discussion in our couple's treatment plan. Every piece was lawfully obtained. Every piece was already mine. Pauline also reviewed the Denver conference materials, the hotel confirmation, the flight records, the banquet photographs, and matched them against the 12-week timeline Amber had announced publicly. The gap between those dates was clear and documentable. We were not building an attack. We were building an accurate record. An honest account of what the medical evidence actually showed and what a dated photograph 5 states away actually proved. Kevin had made fertility the legal argument. We were simply answering it with the truth it deserved. Pauline said it once and I carried it. "He handed us the subject," she said. "We are simply providing the facts that answer it." Amber sent me a message on a Thursday evening, long and structured in a way that suggested drafts. She wrote that Kevin finally had confirmation he was never the problem in our marriage. She wrote she was giving him the family he had always deserved. Then near the end she added the line she clearly meant as the one that would close everything. She wrote, "When this baby is born, everyone will know which one of us was the empty one." I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Pauline without typing a single word in reply. Pauline added it to the file. My father read it when I showed him that weekend. He sets his reading glasses down on the table carefully, the way he does when he is choosing not to say the first thing that rises in him. Then he said, "Some people don't fall because anyone pushes them, Kara. They fall because they keep walking past every warning sign without slowing down." I did not reply to Amber's message. Not that day. Not ever. That silence was not defeated. It was patience taking the shape of something far more useful than a response could ever have been. Mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at a neutral office downtown. Kevin arrived with his attorney and his mother, who sat in the hallway outside the conference room like a woman waiting for an outcome she had already decided was hers. His attorney opened with the same argument from the filing: emotional damage caused by my infertility and my unwillingness to pursue consistent solutions. He said Kevin had endured years of silence in a marriage with no future. Pauline listened to every word without moving. Then she asked, in a very calm voice, whether Kevin wished to have the fertility history formally entered into the mediation record. Kevin went completely still. His attorney looked sideways at him with the expression of a man who had understood that his client withheld something important. Kevin said nothing. The silence lasted long enough to become a sound in itself. Then Pauline reached into her folder and slid the Hargrove Clinic letter across the table. She did not explain it. She did not summarize it. She let it sit there. The room changed before anyone said another word. Kevin stared at that letter the way a person stares at something they buried years ago and cannot quite believe has come back into the light. Kevin's mother asked to speak with me privately after mediation ended. She found me in the corridor and looked different from every version of herself I had known. Helen, without certainty holding her posture, was a different woman entirely. She asked if we could step aside. I nodded and moved with her toward the window at the end of the hall. She looked at the clinic letter I still held. Her eyes stayed on it before coming up to meet mine. I handed it to her without being asked. She read it slowly. Then again. Her lips pressed together. Her throat moved. Then she handed it back and whispered, quietly enough that I had to lean in. "He let us blame you." I did not answer immediately. I gave her the space my father had always given me. Then I said, "Yes, he did. For 4 years." Helen looked out the window for a moment. When she turned back, her eyes were wet, not from performance, but from the grief of a woman realizing she had participated in something cruel without ever knowing the truth. She said she owed me an apology she did not know how to make large enough. I told her to start with one honest sentence and go from there. 2 weeks after mediation, Amber and Kevin announced they were getting married before the baby arrived. Amber posted it publicly on a Sunday evening with a caption about building a real family on love and commitment. I understood immediately what it actually was. The faster she became Mrs. Ellison, the harder it would be for anyone to ask uncomfortable questions about the baby. Marriage would make the story look settled. Kevin agreed because the pregnancy was supposed to be his proof against the clinic letter, proof that the diagnosis had been wrong, proof that whatever had been documented 3 years ago had somehow corrected itself. They were not marrying from love. They were marrying to seal a version of events before anyone could examine it too carefully. I recognized the structure because I had watched Amber use smaller versions of it my whole life. She was not acting from strength. She was acting from the panic of someone who has built a story and can feel the edges beginning to loosen. I noted the wedding date. I said nothing publicly. I called Pauline and confirmed that the filings were proceeding on schedule and that nothing Amber or Kevin announced would change the legal timeline already in motion. My father attended the wedding. Not to celebrate. At my quiet request. He went to sit in the room and observe and remember without anyone there understanding why he had come. He called me afterward from his car in the parking lot with the engine running and his voice careful. He said Amber wore ivory and held her stomach in every photograph taken. He said Kevin smiled the way people smile when they are performing for a camera rather than feeling something genuine. He said Helen barely smiled at all during the ceremony itself. At the small reception, Amber gave a toast about being chosen to give Kevin the family he had always deserved. She paused during it in a specific way meant to remind anyone present of what had come before her. My father said the room applauded without warmth, the kind of applause that happens because silence would be too noticeable. He said people were exchanging looks, and he watched 2 separate couples quietly count something on their fingers at nearly the same moment. 12 weeks. The Denver conference. The dates that did not line up cleanly if you knew where to look. My father ended the call simply. He said, "The room is thinking, Kara. That is enough for now." The next important piece arrived from an ordinary direction. Helen had grown quietly suspicious in the weeks since mediation. She had read the clinic letter. She had stopped returning Amber's calls at the speed she once had. When she sat down one evening to help Kevin organize the baby insurance paperwork, she found a name listed as the emergency contact Amber had provided at a prenatal appointment. The name was Owen Marsh. Helen knew it. Owen was a contractor Kevin had hired to renovate the lake house property the previous spring. Amber had visited the lake house multiple times during those months, during periods when Kevin was away for work. Kevin remembered Owen from the renovation. He remembered Amber mentioning his name more than once and the trips she had made to the property. Helen showed Kevin the paperwork without saying anything else. She let him look at the name and arrive at the connection himself. Kevin called me that evening. His voice was different from any version of it I had heard in 6 years of marriage. He was not yet at the place where an apology existed for him. He said only, "I think I made a very serious mistake." I told him that was a beginning. Then I told him to speak with an attorney, not with me. Amber called me the following afternoon. She had clearly learned that something had shifted, though I doubted she knew exactly what Kevin had seen in the paperwork. Her voice moved through several registers quickly, wounded, then accusing, then briefly softer, then accusing again and louder. She said I had poisoned everyone against her. She said I was bitter and had never been able to watch her be happy. She said I had spent years making Kevin feel like less of a man, and now that she had done what I never could, I was trying to destroy her out of spite. I let her say every sentence. Then when her voice finally slowed, I asked one quiet question. I said, "If you are certain Kevin is the father, why does the idea of a voluntary confirmation frighten you so much?" The line went silent. Not a pause. Not the silence of someone choosing their next word. A different kind of silence, the kind that fills a space when a question arrives somewhere the person was hoping no one would look. Then the call ended. I held the phone for a moment. That silence told me more than the previous 4 minutes of her voice had. Amber organized a baby shower at Helen's house 6 weeks before her due date. She framed it as a celebration and an opportunity for the family to gather around something joyful. What she actually needed was a room full of smiling people so that anyone still doing arithmetic in their heads would feel outnumbered. Helen agreed to host it, and my father suggested Helen had her own purposes for wanting everyone in the same room. I was not invited, which I had expected. Brianna attended and sent updates throughout the afternoon. Halfway through, while guests were passing gift bags around the circle, Helen stood in the center of her own living room and asked Amber a single question in front of everyone present. She asked whether Amber would be willing, after the baby arrived, to confirm Kevin's paternity formally and without hesitation. The room went completely still. Amber laughed first. Then she cried. Then she accused Helen of humiliating a pregnant woman. Kevin sat near the window and watched Amber's response with an expression Brianna described later as careful. Not protective. Not angry. Careful. The expression of a man watching something he has not yet fully decided what to make of. The baby arrived on a Thursday morning in late autumn. Kevin was at the hospital. Helen was in the waiting room. I was at work helping second graders learn to name their feelings and ask for help when things feel too large to carry alone. I found out through Brianna. A girl. 7 pounds 2 ounces. I sat with that for a moment and then returned to my afternoon session because my students needed me present. Kevin had requested a legal paternity test before signing the birth certificate. His attorney filed the request the week prior, citing the insurance paperwork discrepancy and the timeline concerns that had emerged. Amber challenged it through her own attorney. Helen refused to let the family continue living inside a story that might not be true. The test was court-ordered and conducted in the first week of the baby's life. Results came back in a sealed envelope delivered to Kevin's attorney's office on a quiet Wednesday morning I did not know about until Kevin called me that same afternoon. His voice was the flattest I had ever heard from him. He said, "It wasn't me." I said I understood. I told him I was sorry he had been used that way. I meant every word of it. Kevin was not the father. Owen Marsh was confirmed through his own voluntary test shortly afterward, once Kevin's result became part of the record. The clinic letter had not simply defended me. It had established the framework that made every other question possible. Because once Kevin understood that his own fertility had always been the documented medical reality, he understood that a pregnancy Amber claimed was his deserved, honest examination. That examination led to the insurance paperwork. The paperwork led to Owen's name. Owen's name led to the question Helen asked in her living room. And that question led to the truth arriving in a sealed envelope on a Wednesday morning. Amber admitted later, in a conversation Kevin relayed to me months afterward, that she had known there was a possibility the baby was not his. She had believed Kevin would never question it because he wanted so badly to prove the clinic wrong. She had studied the shape of his shame and built her plan around it. She had not loved him. Kevin moved out of the apartment they had rented together before the baby was 2 weeks old. Amber lost Helen. She lost the family sympathy she had gathered so carefully. The structure collapsed without me touching a single piece of it. Kevin came to see me on a Sunday evening several months later. He knocked this time. He stood in my doorway looking like a man who had crossed a considerable distance in a short period, and not all of it had been comfortable. He looked exhausted in the way that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly after a long time of deliberately looking elsewhere. He apologized for the living room. He apologized for standing beside Amber while she said what she said. He apologized for 4 years of his mother's comments he had never corrected. He apologized for putting my silence into a legal filing and labeling it as my failure. He said he had punished me for protecting him and now understood what that meant. Then he asked if there was any part of us that remained worth returning to. I looked at Kevin. I thought about the Tuesday morning at Hargrove and the drive home and his voice asking me not to tell anyone. I thought about what I had carried for him and what he had done with that faithfulness. I said, "I forgave your diagnosis, Kevin. I will never excuse your betrayal." He nodded. He did not argue. He left quietly and I let him. By the time Kevin came to see me, I had already been spending time with someone who had nothing to do with any of it. His name was Nathan Brooks. He was a widowed architect I had met through a children's literacy charity where I volunteered on the second Saturday of every month. Nathan had a quiet way of being present that I had forgotten was possible in the world. He did not treat my history as a wound that needed constant management. He knew what had happened because I told him honestly, but he never made my pain the subject of every conversation. He made me laugh. He made quiet evenings feel like something to look forward to rather than endure. We had been spending time together for 4 months before I introduced him to my father. Dad met Nathan for coffee on a Saturday morning and called me afterward from the parking lot. He said, "He listens the way people listen when they actually mean it." That was the highest compliment Thomas Whitaker knew how to give another person. Nathan never compared himself to Kevin and never asked me to compare them. He showed up consistently and without conditions, the way people do when they are choosing you. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was standing in my bathroom before work with the window cracked open just enough to let in the sound of birds in the yard below. I sat on the edge of the tub and stayed there for a long time. Not from fear or confusion, because some things deserve a moment of stillness before you carry them anywhere. Nathan was in the kitchen when I came out. He looked at my face and went completely still. I walked across and handed him the test without speaking. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. Then he crossed the room and held me without saying a word for a full minute, which was exactly the right thing to do. I called my father that afternoon. He asked how I was feeling, and I told him I felt like someone who had been walking uphill for a long time and had finally found level ground beneath her feet. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother would be so proud of you, Cara." I held the phone tightly when he said that. Some things deserve silence before you speak into them. I let his words stay large for the rest of the afternoon. My daughter was born on a Thursday morning in late autumn, almost exactly 1 year after Amber's baby had arrived in the same season. I did not choose the timing. Life arranged it. I held her in the delivery room while Nathan sat beside me with his hand on my arm. The room was warm and quiet and nothing like the living room where this story had started. I did not post an announcement to prove anything. I did not send a photograph to Amber. I did not call Kevin. I simply held my daughter and let the fact of her exist without needing it to be a response to anyone. Just a person. A whole, newly arrived person who owed nothing to the story that had come before her. My father came that afternoon and held her without speaking for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were full, and he was smiling the way people smile when they have been waiting years for permission to exhale. Amber had called me Barren in my own living room. The clinic report had told the truth about who was carrying what. I had spent a year letting that truth do its quiet, patient work. Some things do not need your voice raised. They only need your patience kept.